Good morning or beginning of afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Myriam Chancy, and I'm the Hartley Burr Alexander Chair in the Humanities here at Scripps. I'm also the Interim Director of the Humanities Institute for the 2019-2020 season. My introduction today will be just a little longer than usual, but not too long, because today's noon reading kicks off our long slate of guest speakers, readings, symposia, evening performances, and workshops that we have planned for you over the course of the year. And at the back, we have these very nice fold-out agendas of what's coming this semester and next semester, and it actually folds out into a beautiful poster. I'll let you experience that yourselves. So those are available at the back, and there's also a sign-up sheet if you're not already on our email list, and we're also on Facebook and Instagram. Some of the events, like today's reading, are co-sponsored by Scripps Presents. You can also find the schedule there in the back if you haven't received it already. And we also want to acknowledge the co-sponsorship of the Scripps Writing Program directed by Kimberly Drake for today's event. The year's theme for the Humanities Institute is World Wounds, inspired by one of the speakers that we'll have in February. And specifically for the fall season has the sub-theme, Decentering the World. This semester, we've invited guest speakers and artists whose work come out of communities that have been marginalized in different ways due to gender, sexuality, religion, race or ethnicity, geography, yet whose emphasis are the ways in which their communities have thrived despite marginalization, misrecognition, and distortion. Many of them do so through the arts, through music, video, the spoken word, others through scholarly research. What they all have in common is that they anchor their work in the humanities for the purpose of advancing our understanding of humanity and how we might better the world for the future from uncertain histories. I'll also bring to your attention the fact that today's speaker is one of a number of writers we have slated this year, which is not an accident because I'm also a writer and an English professor. The others include Mexican-American poet Jose Olivares, who will be here reading in the Noon series October 15th, Mennonite-Canadian novelist Miriam Teves, who will be appearing in an evening program November 12th, and Driftpile Cree Nation queer poet Billy Ray Belcourt, who did inspire the name of the overall series this year, who will be here in February 2020. Related to the February reading, we will be the installation and artist talk collaboration coming up this November between Japanese-Canadian Ayumi Goto and Tahltan First Nations Canadian artist Peter Morin in collaboration with the Claremont Graduate School Gallery and Cultural Studies program show entitled How Do You Carry the Land? Having highlighted some of our programming related to this week's events with Sehba Sarwar, and as someone originating myself from the island of Hispaniola, which houses Haiti and the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, and being of part Taino and Arawak descent, the first peoples of that island, and acknowledging Turtle Island, what First Nations people call North America, I want to be clear that the Scripps College Humanities Institute 2019-20 season acknowledges that the Claremont colleges are settled on the shared traditional land of the Tongva, Serrano, and Cahuilla peoples, many of whom continue to steward the land, their ancestral home. I want to thank our administrative assistant, Adrienne Quintanar, who's seated at the back, for doing the research to identify the peoples whose land we stand and work on, 3 of dozens originally populating California alone. I personally recognize that this statement of territory acknowledgement can only serve as partial restitution and a decolonial process which must make broader measures to understand and reconcile with the colonial history of this land. But I also hope that our programming, what I've just outlined over the 2019-20 season, which includes First Nations participants and partners with Indigenous groups and institutions at the 5 Cs and locally, attempts to begin to do just this. This brings me to today's speaker, Sehba Sarwar, who is not only going to read from her work to us today, but start us off in an exercise related to her installation, which you might have seen located, is starting to go up since yesterday on Jaqua West, below the carob tree, across from Denison Library, which is part of her ongoing On Belonging series and related to the cards you found on your seats, some of you, not all of you, when you came in. We'll turn to these in a minute. The installation started to go up yesterday with the help of Scripps Grounds. Many thanks to them. Sehba will tell you more about them, who are also co-sponsors along with the Scripps Writing Program of both the installation and today's reading. With your help today in filling out these cards, the installation will be completed next Monday, September 16th, when you're all invited to meet under the tree at any time from noon to 2, anytime you can drop in, to finish the installation of Sehba and the Humanities Institute. The tree was in fact selected by Joyce Salas, our landscape operations manager, who when we toured the grounds in late spring said, if you really want a tree that belongs here, you want a pre-Scripps tree. The mother, as I call her, the carob tree, that Joya told me still produces quote-unquote bitter fruit, is one of 2 native trees that predate the college. Finally, before I turn things over to Sehba to lead you in the exercise and her reading, let me properly introduce her. Sehba Sarwar is an award-winning writer who creates essays, stories, poems, and art that tackle displacement, migration, and women's issues. Her writings have appeared in publications including the New York Times Sunday Magazine, Creative Time Reports, Asia, the Magazine of Asian Literature, and elsewhere. Her short stories have appeared in anthologies published by Feminist Press, Akashic Books, and HarperCollins India, while the second edition of her novel, Black Wings, this right here, was released through Vidi's Books in 2019. There are some available at the back today for sale after the Q&A, and there'll be more at the installation on September 16th, and we hope the Huntley will carry some too. She's created video collages that have been screened in Egypt, India, Pakistan, and the US, and her papers are archived at the University of Houston's library, where she was artist in residence for several years. In 2018, she was commissioned by Houston's Menel Collection to create a performance and installation on belonging, a segment of which she's bringing to Scripps College. Born and raised in Karachi, Pakistan, in a home filled with artists and activists, Sarwar is based not far from here in Los Angeles, where she writes, teaches, and creates art. Please help me in warmly welcoming her to our campus.
Thank you so much, Miriam. That was a beautiful introduction. Welcome, everybody. It's so great to see you. So actually, I have a long history with Scripps even before today, and I think I told you this. I was born and raised in Karachi, Pakistan, and I was in a British school, of course, because we were products of colonialism. And when I was applying to college after I finished my when I was applying to college, I ended up applying to Mount Holyoke College in the West, on the East Coast, and Scripps College on the West Coast. I got into both with great scholarships, and I ended up going to Mount Holyoke. But I always remembered Scripps, and here I am doing a project about home at Scripps. So I thought that was really ironic, and I wanted to share that with you. So before I get into a formal reading, what I wanted to do was also just share a quick slide about, I really appreciate Adrian for bringing to our attention the land on which we sit. I'm not going to read exactly what Miriam just read, so just so you know, this map I truly appreciate. It is so good to know who the land belongs to and where we stand, where we sit, and where we are doing our work, and where I'm working on this tree. And this map is courtesy of the California Native Peoples and courtesy of Tima Link, and I got it from Adrian, so thank you. So the On Belonging project is a multidisciplinary project, and it's a site-specific. It's part of a larger project that I started while I was working at the University of Houston. It grew from a memoir that I'm in the process of completing. In 2018, I was commissioned by the Menil Collection to create a full performance and installation, and it's so hard to understand what that is, so I'll just show you some images and then you'll get to see it because we're doing it at Scripps. So these are some pictures from Houston. So there's the tree, and it was a tiny oak tree. It doesn't compare to the grandeur of the carob tree that we're working on here. So you can see individuals filled out cards, and then we hung them. And the fabric itself is really meaningful because I'm a product of displacement. My family comes from, my parents were born in India. They moved after partition in 1947, after 1947. So they did not experience the violence which displaced 10 million people and in which more than 1 million were killed or died. but our family comes from India with roots there. I was born in Pakistan. I am now living in the US, but I am a transnational. I maintain connections, very strong connections in Pakistan. I go back and forth. My mother has a home there. And I often get asked, how does it feel to be an immigrant? And I don't even know how to answer that question, because when I don't know what my home is, I'm a transnational. I have 2 passports, Pakistani and American, and I feel if I could carry 10, I would. I don't believe in borders. So this is a project, and the fabric that the tree is decorated by, does anybody here recognize that fabric by any chance? Anybody at all? Anybody from Pakistan? No? Or India? Oh, do you recognize that fabric? What is it? Absolutely. See? And I know that when you walk by the tree, you go, I know that. Can you say anything about ajrak? It's traditional to, it's known in the province of Sindh. Like we say province, not state. So it's the province of Sindh. And if you wear ajrak, you are from there. And I mean, some Sindhis could accuse me of appropriating because my family is migrant. We are from Pakistan, we are from India, but I was born in Pakistan. So it's like, when do you call a place a home? These are all questions that I explore in my writing, in my memoir, and actually in everything I write, including my novel, including poetry, some of which I'll see how much I can share today. But it's a fabric that's really important, but it's also a design, and this is important to know, that is claimed by the provinces of Gujarat and Rajasthan and India. So that borderline that was made by the British in 1947 is not really a real line, you know. So the fabric means a lot to me, and I just ask people a random question that I'm going to ask you now. So if you pull out the cards and a pen, you will need a pen. Actually, it's not a random question. It's a very clear question, but it's very short, and this is a 2-minute exercise. If you think too much, you're doing too much work. Are you ready? Everybody need a card? Yeah? And are you all ready? Okay. So close your eyes and think of a person, place, or object that gives you a sense of belonging. So just think for a moment. A person, place, or object that gives you a sense of belonging. And when you know, you can open your eyes and you can draw it, write it, scribble something, mark up the globe, use it, mark it, whatever you want. And these are some examples right here of what a couple of people did. If you don't like drawing, you don't have to, just X on the map, and then write a phrase. Don't think too much, a phrase or a sentence about what you just created. And when you're done, just flip the paper over and write down the name of the city and country where your mother was born. So, the name of the city and country where your mother was born. Cool. Everybody just about done? If you're done, Miriam, I, or Adrian can collect up the cards from you. Okay. Okay. And this is an invitation for you to please join Miriam, myself, Adrian next Monday that is September 16th at noon, so you can hang your card on the actual installation. So you can see some pictures of that. This is some people in Houston walking by and seeing the tree and this was up for 2 weeks over there. That's what it looks like when it's done. And do you recognize that tree? Anybody? So that is the carob tree, the 100-year-old carob tree. And deep thanks to Joya Salas, who helped with the installation yesterday, and Copeland Andrews and Jorge Sanchez. They were absolutely amazing. They cut, they trimmed, they were phenomenal. So this was what was happening yesterday in case anybody walked by Denison Library. I don't know if anybody saw. And that's what you are seeing right now. You'll see this for a week. And, well, we don't need that. So, please come by. And just so you know how important your words are, I'm going to read a poem. This was published as part of Paper Cuts, the Nomad edition that was edited by Suraya Khan, and it's online. And it's called A Found Poem. You don't know what that means, a found poem? Anybody? A found poem? It's made up of phrases that I did not write, and that is absolutely true of this poem. And this poem is found, the phrases are taken out of cards, just like the ones you wrote today. On belonging, a found poem. Ocean in my blood, sunburns from the beach, my mother, siblings, family, four-legged and human. Summer vacation, a long time ago, with a good book, where I am safe listening to my music, laughter from the belly, spaces in between, feet on earth, twisted tongue embrace. 2. Amor, el desierto, long drives, coffee, brick, sidewalks, the smell of rain, tortillas, chile, stone walls, trees, waterfalls, dock in lake, surrounded by farmland, a horizon of cotton fields, my elementary school, yard in hot sun, 2-lane country road after wheat harvest, winter coming. 3. Grandmother's red house and the smell of her PJs, borderlands, open Texas skies, Bangladesh, mountains, central space, Punjab, Durango in the heart of Mexico, Muraran, Hokkaido, Japan, houseboat in Kashmir, Z, an ancient city wall, China, my home city, atoms, cosmos, innermost self, everywhere, a global citizen. Love has no limitation of belonging. Thank you. Thank you. I have so treasured the comments that people have written. It's just been so, and those are all actually archived at the University of Houston. And this is another poem that came out of that same series, and it's called Rotation, and it's dedicated to my mother, who is 80 years old, and in 2019 alone, and she also carries 2 passports, and in 2019 alone, she will have visited 6 countries. I'm not talking cities, I'm talking countries, has stepped across 6 borders in 1 year, in 2019 alone. Rotation. She heats oil, rolls puri, drops flat flour into bubbling oil. You conquer, enforce rules, ban travel. In another pan, she pops coriander seeds, tosses sliced potatoes. You build walls, deport passengers, obstruct asylum seekers. She serves flaky puri. We devour together. You demand documents, collect fingerprints, require face, identification. Our choice. We eat, see, speak, wear, practice as we please, where we wish. You cannot hinder climbs, prevent tide, stop earth rotation. Like waves we cross, we fly, we roar, we stay or leave. Our movement, permanent. Thank you. So I primarily identify as a fiction writer. When people say, what do you do? I'm a writer, but then I also create art, as you saw, but it's connected to my writing. And then I also write poetry, but if you really want to know what I only want to do or what I want to do the most, it's this, to write. I just love the process of writing. I love sitting at my computer, or my notebook actually. And Black Wings I wrote by hand, if you can believe it. I wrote the whole book, the first draft, not as a draft, not in a book, but I'd scribble it, and then I'd go to my computer and write the next draft, and then revise and revise and revise. So I wrote each chapter by hand, and that's my first love. But I also love the freedom of writing everything else, and then doing the performance, doing all of it. And I hope that, and maybe that's what comes from not wanting borders. I don't believe in borders. I don't want to put borders in my own work. And I'm very grateful that I haven't had to. So Black Wings was born a long time ago, actually. It was born when I was growing up in Karachi, and then we'd go to the north in the mountains, and we would have vacations. And there was a story. And when people now ask me what the book is about, I just say it's about witches. And when I say it in this country, you know what they think of, right? Think of Salem. I was like, no, that's not my culture. The witches I'm talking about the metaphor of witches. I'm talking about what happens when women go against the norm and what they are tagged. They are tagged as evil. We are tagged as evil. We are tagged as wrong. We are tagged as having done something bad. So the novel explores the lives of two women. The protagonist, Yasmin, lives in Houston. She's divorced. She has 2 kids. She's estranged from her family. She blames her mother for her twins' death. And she hasn't seen her mother for a long time. And the mother, Lela, who Yasmin invites to Houston and then immediately regrets it because she realizes that she doesn't want to face her past. She does not want to know. And there are things that her mother has done that she blames her for. There's things that Yasmin has done. So the story is a circular motion of how we revisit our past and what we experience and what we see and the truths we find. And these 2 characters, they do it through storytelling. Yasmin's daughter begins it by, Yasmin's mother, Lela, begins the storytelling because she doesn't know how to connect to her daughter. And she starts telling stories to her grandkids. One day, they are trapped inside the house in Houston. There's been a storm, and they don't know how to get back. They're worried about their mother, and the grandmother starts telling a story. So I'll pick up from there. She's beginning to tell the story to her grandkids. And the grandmother is in Hawa Gali with her sister, and she's talking about the day after the storm. A few days later, the sun shone as if rain had never passed through our surroundings. Shireen, that's her sister. Shireen and I were so happy to be outside, we forgot Babar's words. We began to play a catch game, and when Shireen threw our ball over the boundary wall, we stepped outside the gate without thinking. After searching the roadside with a little success, we gave up and started playing running catching. Before we could register that we had broken family rules, our house was out of sight. Shireen said, let's just go to Titli Park. Titli Park, a few miles up on a mountaintop with its log cabin, trees to climb, and wild monkeys, was our favorite spot in Hawa Gali. I agreed, knowing that the grown-ups were napping and that we would not be missed. We chased each other along the uphill road, racing between pigeons that bathed in puddles. Deeper in the forest, wild strawberries winked and monkeys screamed. After walking uphill for half an hour, we were out of breath. We slowed down. Titley Park had never seemed so far when we were with everybody else. The sun sank behind pine trees and shadows lengthened, reminding me of warnings that we had been given about kidnappers and beggar camps. I thought of the city where throngs of beggar children pressed wet cheeks to automobile windows. Some children didn't have tongues or eyes. Others were missing legs or arms. I shivered. I remembered Baba's story. Baba's the cousin. I remembered Baba's story about witches who looked like Kanisbua, and I was glad I was not wearing my earrings. When I stared at a fir tree, the trunk seemed to have transformed into a moving object that looked like Kanisbua, approaching us with her burqa flapping around her like wings. Shireen pulled at my sleeve, pointing to the mountainside where spilling, swarming, and coiling around fir trunks was cobra plants that seemed to have come alive. We sprinted, we screamed and sprinted downhill, certain that the eyes and necks of the cobra plants were following us down the road, and that a Kaniz, that is the witch, was hot on our trail. From out of the mist appeared an old man wearing a tweed hat with gray hair that sprouted in all directions. His shadow was crooked, making him look like a puppet. The man stretched his cane across our path to stop us. "Hello, girls," he said. "Is everything okay?" I grabbed Shireen's hand. "Where's your mother?" the man asked, his deep voice sounding like a growl. "Leave us alone," I stammered. His eyebrows shot up to join tufts of hair growing beneath his cap. "You better come with me," he said, reaching for my free hand. Shireen recovered and kicked the old man's shin. We grabbed each other's hands and raced into the mist, stopping only once we were certain that the man was not behind us. Our hearts pounded, our eyes bulged, and our feet hurt. "Is he gone?" Shireen asked. I swallowed, sensing danger not yet past. In the moonless night, with a few stars sparkling through the web of mist, fireflies flew between us. The scent of crushed pine mingled with mist and earth rose to our nostrils. In the trees above, an owl hooted and leaves rustled. A shriek, belonging neither to animal nor person, speared the air. Shireen's cold hand clutched my elbow. "What was that?" she quavered. I shook my head. We heard a flapping sound. Above us, a dark shadow with black wings that spanned more than 6 feet flew from tree to tree. "Run!" we screamed. Our footsteps thumped on the downhill road. We could feel rustling above us. Fear of the Kaniz spurred us to run faster than we had ever run before. In the distance, through the fog, we sighted our house lights, inviting us to safety. Rounding the corner, we passed the entrance lampposts, and our feet crunched the gravel on our driveway. Shireen pushed the front door open. Once inside, she slammed it shut. A thump sounded against the door. Our parents emerged from the study, their foreheads wrinkled with worry. When we told them that we had tried to walk to Titley Park, their fear was replaced with anger. Shireen and I listened without saying a word. Inwardly, I resolved never to stray outside alone again. The flapping, the shriek, the old man and the cobra plants were enough to make me believe that Baba's stories about the haunted mountainside. I barely slept that night. When I did, my rest was haunted by a scream and by dark shadows that followed us. I was certain that the man was a kidnapper and that Shireen and I had been marked as targets by Kanizes that roamed the mountainside. I'm going to jump just a little bit. They get grounded, and so they're sitting at home alone. The next day was sunny, and our entire family went to Titley Park for a picnic. But Shireen and I had to stay at home with my older aunt. We slumped in the dark stairwell, arguing over who had made the decision to leave the grounds. A deep voice spoke behind us. "Stop grumbling. First you break rules, then you fuss." I whipped my head around. Babar, you didn't go with them? Babar grinned, showing his wolf teeth. Of course not. I'm going to go shoot kanizes. Shoot kanizes? I thought of Kaniz Bua squatting in the open courtyard at our house, scrubbing our clothes, or crushing garlic or ginger, her sleeves rolled up and her face gleaming with sweat. I felt sorry for her, but Babar gave me little time to think. He signaled for us to follow him, which we did, all the while thinking about how Babar was paying attention to us for the second time. Once in the attic, we told him about the old man and the black shadow. Babar nodded, as if he already knew. That was a Kaniz following you, and the man must have been a kidnapper. I'm glad you weren't harmed. Those cobra plants are dangerous. They wrap around children's legs and trip them so the Kanizes can catch them. My eyes must have widened because Babar said, don't worry, I'm going to destroy the Kanizes. He locked the attic door behind him, closing out the previous night's dangers, and pulled open the curtains to allow the speckled sunshine to enter through past the pine leaves. Babar inserted shiny steel pellets into his gun's chamber and issued orders. You have to be quiet. Signal to me by raising your left hand if you think we are being watched by a Kaniz. The windows were open without glass or bars. When I crouched close to the one he assigned me to watch, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily a Kaniz could fly inside. 10 minutes later, Shireen raised her left hand. Moving near her window, I saw a dark shadow hanging off an oak tree branch, but its cloudy shape was unclear. Babar inched closer. He rested the airgun's nozzle on the windowsill and pulled the trigger. Ping! The bullet ricocheted off a chimney. We heard flapping and saw a shadow flying upward. Its dark shape made me want to run downstairs and hide under my bed. Missed. Next time I'll get it. Do you know that a Kaniz becomes harmless when I shoot it? The witch turns into a monkey, a squirrel, or a crow. You'll see. For a long time, nothing happened. The heat knocked us into a doze. But when a shadow flew across my face, I opened my eyes. I saw a Kaniz flapping her wings past the oak branches. A thick smell like raw sewage filled the air. Yellow eyes pierced mine, making my heart pound so hard I was certain the beat could be heard at the tea shop in the valley. My chest tight, I slithered towards Babar and pinched his arm. Awakening with a jolt, he saw my left hand raised. He picked up his airgun and took aim. He pulled the trigger. Something small, like a rock, crashed and hurtled, breaking the tree's boughs. We popped our heads over the windowsill, sunlight blinding us, but the shadow had disappeared. Instead, far below, on the lowest branches of the oak tree, a crow stretched its wings. The Kaniz transformed. Babar put his gun away. One less Kaniz to contend with. Thank you. I can stop there. The novel kind of moves, this is just one story. The novel opens in Houston right after 9/11, so it begins in Houston, moves to Pakistan. The second part too begins in Pakistan. And it kind of moves back and forth, but the storytelling is what moves the narrative through. So there's multiple stories. Some are real, some are true, some are made up, but you can ask any questions you want about anything. Yes. So this is the second edition, and this is a great question. So the first edition was published in Pakistan in 2004, right before my daughter was born, so the novel was completely eclipsed by my daughter. And the book, I did some tours in Pakistan, I did a lot of readings, and I did stuff in Houston, but I really couldn't give attention to the book, and then the book ran out of print. And then a couple of years ago, a publisher friend in El Paso, Texas, everybody knows where that is now, unfortunately, had started a publishing house, and she wanted to use it as a textbook in her class, and so back when she experienced it in 2007. So she invited me to give her the book so she could publish it in the US. So it was published this year, the second edition, and I thought it was going to be really easy. I was like, yeah, sure, you can have it, and then I started reading over it, and a lot of you are young and you're students, so maybe you don't know the difference between I'm sure you know what you write as freshmen and what you write as seniors, right? So it's kind of like that. It's kind of like the difference of like, in 15 years, how your writing can change. So I began reading it, and I was like, I told her 1 month. It ended up, the revision took me 6 months, and I ended up rewriting it, actually, really chopping it like 30 pages shorter, and I'm really happy with it. So that's the long answer to your question. Thank you. And this drawing actually is by my daughter. So it's a web of drawings, so there's a story behind that. I can tell it, but let's see if anybody else has any other questions.
And Adrian has a microphone. People who don't have his voice as loud as mine.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on what you mean when you say I don't believe in borders?
Well, so that's a great question too. I feel like, so the question is, can I elaborate what I mean when I say I don't believe in borders? Well, I think the whole concept of borders really became firm after the Second World War. And when I was a kid, my family is from India, like I said earlier, and I don't know if you guys are following what's happening between India and Pakistan, what's happening in Kashmir, what is happening in Bangladesh. We can't go across the border to see our family anymore. When we were kids in the 70s, my mother used to get visas. She had to get a police reporting visa to go to India to see family, where they still had a family home, and she has cousins. But we weren't even names. We didn't even carry, my siblings and I didn't even carry passports. We were just names penciled into her passport. And one of the first things I did when my daughter was born was to get her a passport, because I know she has to move, and that is the only way to cross it now, right? So I feel like we live in a time where our reality is shaped by the world in the way it looks today. But if you saw the map that I was distributing, there's no border, because the borders we know today will not be the borders in another 200, 250, 300 years. It's changing. And people are building walls. I have a friend who's writing a dissertation who's following the miles of walls that are being built around the globe. And she maps it. And it's like growing at a speed that we cannot believe. We talk about the US-Mexico wall, but I mean, there are so many walls that are growing every day. For what? So the animals can't cross? So the butterflies cannot flow through? Like that's what's happening in South Texas right now? So that's what I mean. I believe that and there are people whose lives have been cut because of that. Right? There's Bangladesh on one side, and then there's West Bengal on the other. There's Kashmir on one side. There's Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, you can name it. It's just sad. So.
Thank you so much. I was going back to the first question and your answer. My question was going to be for the writers here, or the would-be writers. When you were first writing the book, not when you rewrote it, did you have help? What was your process?
That's a good question too. So I have always had writer support. Black Wings, I wrote it actually through stories. I began with the stories, and then I created the characters around it. But once I had the stories, I knew I had to have characters. And I had a writing group when I was in Houston, so we used to meet monthly, and we used to workshop each other's work, and that was really important. So those of you who are writing and have ideas, a writer's network is critical. You can go on, you can get a Bachelor's of Fine Arts, you can get an MFA, but that network that we create for ourselves, where we get feedback, and honest feedback that we can trust, feedback that we respond to, that goes somewhere, as opposed to somebody saying, oh, this is good, this is good. We don't want to hear that. We want to hear how to tighten our work. So even for this version, I had my editor. I had an amazing editor. And she was giving me feedback along the way of through the rewriting. I would send her sections and she would give feedback. Support, I think, is critical. Support that you can trust, of writers you trust, whose work you love. And then reading. Reading like, I could not write without reading. You're welcome. Yes? What are some books that I've recently been reading? I'm actually going back to Toni Morrison this month. I feel like I've read Toni Morrison so long ago and I wanted to go back and read some of her work. And especially because my daughter, who's 15, picked up Sula and then Tar Baby, and she wanted to talk about it and I couldn't give her clear feedback. So right now I'm reading Tar Baby all over again. And I'm just loving it. I love Sandra Cisneros. We'll talk about her in your class. Arundhati Roy is one of my favorite writers. Rohinton Minstry I love. Michael Ondaatje. The list just goes on, and Julia Alvarez. It just depends on the time of day, the month, the year. So I have a big stack. And then I have a lot of friends who have books out. So I have their books sitting by my bedside. I have to read those, obviously. I'm expecting them to read mine, so. Yes?
I was curious as to how you think your daughter becoming a mother, how that affected your work or didn't affect it. And certainly in terms of the amount of time you had and taking care of another baby.
That's a great question, too. So how becoming a mother affected my writing in terms of time, in terms of consciousness of my own writing as being a human being. I think, actually, a friend of mine who interviewed me on radio in Houston when I was doing the tour for Black Wings in the spring, he asked me this question, too. He said, how did Black Wings change because of you being a mother? Did it change because you're a mother? And that is true. I think the novel became softer. It became much softer because I think as a mother, before I was a mother, I was like, yeah, of course I know everything. And I was rough to my mother, I have to own. And my mother will remind me, when she sees my daughter doing that to me, she's like, that's what you did to me. So I think it's definitely made me listening to her stories and listening to her and going through that whole process and living that process and living that life, definitely. And I have in Black Wings there are 2 kids, and I used to and in those days I was teaching full time. I was working with middle school and then high school students, so I thought I understood kids. I don't think you understand kids until you have one, until you go through that process, and yeah. She's 15, so you can imagine, for those of you who are mothers, it's a challenge. So it does affect my writing, and I write a lot about her, and yeah. And she proofs my work also. She reads my work. She reads my blog, she reads anything that I write, she does read. Now she's old enough, so, and she gives me feedback. And that goes back to your question, whose feedback do you want? You can get the feedback of somebody who doesn't have as much experience, but again, somebody whose voice you can trust. Anything else? I've just really enjoyed being here, and I look very forward to seeing you guys. There's a few copies of the book, and then there'll be more. I think the books are $20? $20
if anyone's interested at the back, and Sehba would be happy to sign a book if you'd like to sign. And we'll have more books if you're interested on the 16th. So on the 16th, this coming Monday, if you want to take part in the installation, we'll be there hanging your cards. Other people's cards coming in this week from noon till 2. We do need extra hands, so even if you only have like 10 minutes, come on by and help us out under the pear tree, which is just in the open area in front of Denison Library on this side of the farm. And Sehba, thank you very much for.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, I've totally enjoyed. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me, Miriam.